senior engineer at QE. We are specialized in building video editing products for PCs, for mobile devices like LG mobile phones, Nokia mobile phones. We even have a photo sharing website. It's called Schwab.com. You can visit our website at www.movie.com and feel free to try out our products. We make very good video productions out of users' images and videos by identifying good portions of your media and building MTV-like videos out of your content. The agenda for today's meet it's about my experiences over the last 12 months building multimedia applications for Android. Am I audible there? Sure. Building multimedia applications for Android. I won't be delving too much into the technical aspects. I'll be kind of letting people know the kind of power Android gives you to develop multimedia applications, especially video, audio, and images. Images based on OpenGL and Android 2D graphics. For instance, the video and audio, the two heavyweight classes, media player, media recorder. Then there is the interactive music jet player. There is a sound pool and audio track. For images, it's mostly on OpenGL and the native side of OpenGL on which many people have asked questions. So I'll be answering some of the NDK and OpenGL related stuff. The scope, it's purely an introductory level to Android's SDK multimedia capabilities. As I told you, I'll be telling some things about NDK and OpenGL, but I won't be going too much into OpenCore or stage-fright media frameworks or codecs or file formats in general. It's kind of what you need to know to write applications on Android operating system. I'll be giving some references to API demos, but unfortunately I can't demo the product which we are working on right now. So I'll be giving references to multimedia articles in the developer website and the API demos wherever it's relevant. Okay, let's start with Android and multimedia, the state of multimedia on Android. Compared to iPhone, it's an open acknowledged fact that Android's multimedia is not up to the mark. The framework doesn't stand up to what iPhone offers just because it's kind of the middleware is not exposing out power to the developers to write good multimedia applications. While that is true, many people question why there is no iMovie on Android. iMovie has been released on iPhone almost 3-4 months back, but there is no equivalent or even a 50% power application on Android. Why is that the case? So I'll be answering such questions. In general, I see multimedia development on Android as an opportunity because even the platform is gaining strength in multimedia. Though it's not very good right now, it's gaining strength in multimedia. And I see it as a huge developer opportunity to build good company applications, good company multimedia applications. But right now, if you visit the Android App Market store, you will primarily find applications in two different categories. One is media consumption-based applications and one is media production-based applications. The consumption-based applications, the best example is the gallery. You click so many pictures around, then you see your pictures in cool 3D effects. That's the media consumption. You are enjoying the media which you have shot. And the media production, there are very, very few applications in media production. For instance, iMovie is a media production-based application. You are stitching together your content to create a good video production. Such applications are very few in Android. There are some picture-based applications like Pixay is one good example of a image editor on Android. There are some augmented reality stuff, some camera enhancement applications, but there are no good content production applications on Android operating system. So as the framework gains ground, as the multimedia middleware on Android grows up, I think we should be able to see more and more applications. So I think in that point of view, I think this is a very good opportunity. This platform is a very good opportunity for developers to build good multimedia apps. And before getting to build multimedia apps, this is a favorite quotation of mine. It's from a very old book by Earl Kawasaki. It was a very integral part of Apple's Macintosh development team. The first line is actually a mark quote. If I say the exact one, it's politically incorrect, so I can't say that. So I just mark it down. And it says, application should be deep. I'll give you a simple example of an image resizer. We capture a 5 megapixel image on a Nexus 1. It should be very huge. I want to just resize it to a passport size photograph. The first interface you give to the user is half the size, double the size, or you want a custom dimensions for your image. Then if you want to go deep, then you offer a menu saying that do you want to retain aspect ratio, do you want high quality, low quality, those kind of stuff. So when you are giving that depth, user becomes indulgent in your application. And video applications have to hold users for long periods of time. If you want to say ask a user to edit his video on a mobile phone, you have to grab his concentration for 5 or 10 minutes. He should be able to have patience to deal with what you are offering him. So when you are thinking about developing media applications, multimedia applications for Android or for any platform in general, you have to be very careful about what you expose to the user, how you expose to the user, and the last factor is elegant. It's actually all media applications have to be elegant. It shouldn't be that you open an application, you don't know what to do, and that's all, you uninstall and never come back. So, there is the completeness factor. I'll tell you a simple example. There is a picture editor, it's available in the market, I won't name it. You can edit a picture, you can show it to a person, but you can't save the picture. So what's the point? You can't even upload the picture. So there's no point in writing such applications. So in that way, these 4 commandments for mobile application development are very essential. So I just pushed through in this slide. And now let's start off with the Android media capability. So this is the big package, Android.media. All the media stuff is collected together in this package. The media player, media recorder, jet player, stuff like that. The developer side link is at the bottom of the slide. Okay. As far as Android is concerned, there is no firm distinction between audio and video. Both take the same path. The media player, media recorder are not audio media player and audio media recorder. They are media player and recorder. They are very highly encapsulated classes which deal with audio and video rendering or audio and video recording on Android. So there are no distinct ways. What I'll do is, first I'll start with audio, tell how media player can be used to record and play audio, and then go to video, and finally let's look at the image part of the talk. And before going into that, multimedia is all about file formats and codecs. While I was talking about completeness on developing multimedia applications, we always see that if you bring a WMV video and ask me to play on my old Nokia phones, no, it doesn't play because the codecs are not supported on the device. So you always need to be aware of the least common denominator on mobile platforms, and when you write an application, it has to run on the minimum. Say if Froyo 2.2 Nexus 1 is the spec, then these are the file formats and these are the codecs supported. If you are not supporting either of these, then I don't think the app deserves to be published. So as far as the file formats are concerned, Froyo baseline supports 3GPP, MP4, RAW, AMR. Then the codecs supported are H.263, H.264 for video, FF4 simple profile for video, and all the voice recording on Android is in AMR, adaptive multi-rate. There is no AAC, there is no WMA, it's AMR. But if you look at phones like Motorola Droid, they do support WMV. It's the add-on, it's built upon Froyo's capabilities, but this is the least common denominator. And when we write a multimedia application, we have to ensure that these are supported. These are the things recorded on the phone, and these should be played back on the phone. That's the bottom line. Okay, now to the big 2 classes. media player and media recorder. The complexity these classes pack in, we have to understand it's a huge chunk of code which these two classes run. Sometimes I feel it becomes very unwieldy to manage these classes also. I think most of the Android developers might be aware of OpenCore framework by Packet Video. OpenCore framework is actually the native part, and there is a binder and there is a Java layer on top of it, which is a media player. So media player and OpenCore API have a one-to-one match. Like you can init the video player, you can set the part of the local video to be played, and you can start a playback. So all the processing, the codecs, the file format passing happens on the native side by the OpenCore, or more recently in Froyo, there's a new media framework called StageFright. So these are the two major frameworks, media frameworks in Android. So essentially, you need to understand that file parsers for BGP, MP4, and codecs, which have been listed in the previous slide, are together bundled out in the OpenCore or the StageFright framework. And a media player and media recorder actually call into the OpenCore framework to do the necessary work. Just that there is one major difference between OpenCore and StageFright. OpenCore was a pure software framework. For instance, today we know that mobile phones tout HD as a selling factor. They say that we can record HD videos and we can play HD videos. For instance, you have a good movie, you can put it in your HTC Evo 4G, go on a vacation, plug your phone to the TV and watch the movie over the phone. How is it possible? HD video decoding is not a trivial task. It's a very, very, very heavy task. Only hardware specific ASICs can perform such tasks. So StageFright has enabled Android phones to leverage onto such kind of hardware codecs. But OpenCore is a software codec. If you ask me to decode H.264 in software, I'll tell you come back tomorrow. It's not possible. But StageFright enables hardware rendering as well as hardware recording. So in real time, 25 FPS HD video, you can record, you can play. So that's the beauty of StageFright. And from now on, it's on an up curve. From Gingerbread onwards, I think it will be StageFright taking over. So if you see the current Froyo distro on Nexus 1, you have only two resolutions of video. One is a 176x144, which is like used for sending MMS, which is a low quality FP4 simple profile codec. And then there is a very high quality HD, which is 1080x720. It's based on StageFright. And I don't know if people would have seen in the DDMS logs, instead of media player, these days you find StageFright player in the log, in the module if you are playing audio on your emulator or on your device. So that's the major difference between OpenCore and StageFright. Just to illustrate the complexity of a media player, this is a state chart I have written from the Android developers media player entry. I'll tell you why this class has some issues when I come to why there is no iMovie on Android. But this is the state chart. You have two ways to initialize a media player, but essentially we are interested in the initialized state, the prepared state, the started and stopped, or playback completed. So what you do is you give a path to the media player, you ask it to prepare the file for playback, then you ask to start the playback, then you stop the playback. You also have functions like seeking in between, or you want to pause the playback, you want to increase or decrease the level. Those kinds of functions are possible. But if you want to get a particular video frame out of a video, no, that's not possible in media player. It was possible in API level 1, but not right now. Okay, so this is the complexity of the media player. So getting out all the fundamentals out of the way, now let's start with audio. For audio, there are 4 different use cases which Android has identified for applications, and they have crafted out 4 different classes for each of these use cases. The first one is media players, which we have already discussed. The second one is called Soundpool, which specializes in multiple audio sources. Like you want to play multiple audios at the same time. Say you are on a game, there is a background music happening, and you want to say level 1. So such kind of use cases Soundpool caters to. Then there is audio track and audio record, which specialize in raw audio manipulation. And finally, you have the Jet Player. I think people would have heard about Sonybox. Sonybox is the company behind Jet Player. They specialize in interactive music. When you will be playing a game, when you are not doing anything, there will be very quiet music. Then suddenly when you start running around, then the music picks up. So how is that possible? That's called interactive music. And Jet Player is the player which deals with it. Throughout the talk, I will be telling about some things I haven't worked on. This is one such thing I haven't worked on, but I think sharing it would be useful to people developing games probably. Okay, so these are the things under audio we'll be discussing. So let's start with media player on audio. If you want to play a simple audio resource which you have packaged into your APK file, it's very simple. You are just giving the file path, raw sound file, and you are telling start, it plays. If you want to play a file for a file system, you are giving the path of the file here. You are asking it to prepare, but there is a problem here. The prepare is a blocking call. You won't return immediately. So if it's a very short audio file, there's no problem. It returns. If it's a very long one, probably it might take some time. There is an alternative to prepare called as prepare async, so that it doesn't block you. You'll get a callback after the preparation is done, and you can start the playback in the callback. So we have to use the prepare call very judiciously there. We can't. If you have a 2 or 3 MB file and you say prepare, it might take a bit of time. It might hang your UI. So you have to be careful when you are using prepare that way. So that's the thing. The media player class, to play or record content, it's very easy. It's very just 3 or 4 steps. But if you want to do advanced things in media player, there is a problem, and there are no alternatives. That's the problem. So let's go to the sound pool. The sound pool, as I told, if you want to have multiple sounds being played, you can always say we can have multiple media players, but media player is a resource farm. You shouldn't spawn more than, if you are spawning more than 2 media players, it means something is definitely wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. So sound pool is a very, very nifty class. Say if you start a new media player, you have a 30% overhead. Sound pool will give you 5% overhead. So you have the comparative figure there. So the sound pool class, what you do is you continuously push sounds into the sound pool, and each sound is given an ID. Using that ID, you can try to slow down the playback of the sound, you can try to speed up the playback, you can try to mute the volume of that particular sound. And every sound, you will give a priority. So what happens is when you init a sound pool, you have to tell what are the maximum number of sounds in the sound pool. Say if I have 10 sounds in a sound pool. Now I am pushing the 11th one, the lowest priority will be kicked out, and this one will take its place. So that's how sound pool operates, and it's a very nifty class, especially for game developers who want to kind of have multiple sound layers in their applications. This is a very good class to think about. So this is the sound pool class. Next, let's go to audio track. Audio track is for say you are writing a UI and you want a small bell sound to be played when user clicks a button. Opening up a media player, play a small bell sound is a kind of overhead which should, because by that time that file gets played, user would have already gone from that place. So what you should do is, this is a very good thing, because media player what actually does is, it passes the file, then calls the codec, decodes the content and plays it to either the screen or the mic. If it's video, it's the screen. If it's sound, it's the mic. It's the speaker. So what audio track does is, you give it raw PCM samples. In crude way, if I want to put it, it's like playing a wave file. Wave is not exactly raw PCM. Okay, so you have PCM samples in a buffer. You give it to audio track. Audio track with very low overhead, it can just play that. But there are 2 modes in which you can operate audio track. Say for the example I gave you, like a small bell sound you want to play. Audio track has a static mode. So the bell sound probably will be some 10,000 samples, 10,000 PCM samples. Just put it there, and I'll show the example next. fine. This is a streaming example. There is a difference between streaming and static. Okay, you load the content into the buffer and say play, it plays in static mode. But the streaming mode is slightly different. You have chunks of PCM samples. Say you have 10 chunks of 10,000 PCM samples each. You want to play it chunk by chunk. In that case, the stream music. So this is the flag that distinguishes static and streaming. So as far as audio track is concerned, you are telling that it's PCM, 16-bit PCM unsigned, then signed, and then you have a mono configuration. It's not a stereo, it's a mono. You have the music length, and you are telling it's a streaming mode. And here there is something very interesting. You are telling play first and writing onto the track later. But for the static mode, it's the opposite. You have to first load data into the buffer and then call play. But for streaming mode, you have to first call play, then it will be ready to accept data onto the audio track, then you write data onto the audio track. But remember again, this is a blocking call. So if you are using intensive audio rendering, this always has to go into a separate thread. Otherwise, this will hog the UI. So these are the kinds of things you have to be careful when you write multimedia applications. Especially if you want to write elegant multimedia applications, they have to be kind of responsive to the user. You can't block the UI like that. So then there is a similar counterpart, the audio record class, which again specializes in recording PCM data, which is raw audio data, not compressed. I've just provided a link there which discusses the audio record class, but it's essentially the same thing. Then next, let's look at the Jet Player. I've already told the use case for the Jet Player. It's for interactive music, especially for game developers. It's a very essential tool. But we have to remember one thing for Jet Player. There is a Jet Creator, which is a PC software. You have to create clips and load onto the Android device. These can be played properly on the device using the Jet Player class. This is not, it's not that you can create clips on the phone and play. You have to create clips elsewhere, get onto the phone and play. I haven't used this class, but I think apparently it's very useful for game development. Okay, so this is about the audio part of the Android Media Framework. There is nothing else. Most of the use cases are covered using these four classes as far as audio is concerned. Now let's look at the video part. Again, let's start with media player for video. For video, it's slightly more difficult, the media player installation, because there is something called a holder you need to, because for video, it's not just displaying to the speaker, rendering audio to the speaker. You also have to show frames on the screen. That's where this holder comes into picture. You are calling this set display holder. Holder is essentially a surface holder of a surface view. So once you start a media player on a surface view, the media player holds the view. You can't start another media player on the same view, essentially. So you can't have two media players showing on the same view. That's the problem. Then there are some listeners for the media player. There is an on completion listener. So once the media playback is completed, you get a callback. There is an on prepared listener. So when I call prepare async, this is a non-blocking call. So immediately it returns. And once the preparation is complete, you get a on prepared listener. And in on prepared, you can just say start the playback. And on completion, you say destroy the media player. So that's essentially playing video through the media player. And the set path for the video is done through the local path, say data source for the video. But if you think this is too much to do, there is an alternative class which is video view. Video view, you have to take the video view widget, put it into the XML file. Then you find the view. What you do is you set the video path. But here there is something interesting going on. What they do is they tell set media controller. Set media controller means if you would have seen the media player, there is a play button, there is a seek bar or a progress bar which indicates the progress of playback. There is a rewind and there is a forward. All this will be embedded into your view when you are doing set media controller. So explicitly, you need not say video view dot start. Once the user sees the play button, he can click it and he'll start it. Everything is integrated underneath. Or if you want to start it manually, you can always do a video view.start and the playback starts. So this is much easier way of playing a video on Android. Okay, now there is nothing beyond this for video. All you can do is you can record video. Again, recording is same. You have to set the source from where you want to record. You say record from camera. You write to a file, and you can specify if it's 3GPP format, which codec you want to record it. So you would have got a feel by now that audio and video on Android means playback and record, nothing else. That's why there is no iMovie on Android. Okay, so if you would have seen any forum, you can just type iMovie Android. You get so many brickbats for Android. This is the reason. The framework doesn't allow you to get raw video frames out from the native side. It doesn't allow you to get raw audio out from the native side. Everything is done internally by the OpenCore or the StageSprite framework. So what should be the way forward? Okay, as I told you, in API level 1, there was a get frame so that you could get a video frame. Essentially, to have an iMovie application, you have to get a video frame, you have to have the pixels of the frame, then you manipulate the pixels, and that's how you process video. But that's not possible. In the API level 1, we had a get frame, but that vanished from 2 onwards. And I think many people would have seen the live wallpapers on Nexus 1. If you are playing music, they respond to the beats of the music. I don't know if many people would have seen. There is a visualization. You can use a wallpaper and you can play. If the music is very fast, then you see big waves appearing. If it's a very soft music, then it's like very small. There are no peaks at all. That is accomplished using this Snoop API, mediaplayer.snoop. So when you are playing audio, you snoop the audio, you tell, I want 102 for audio samples. You read the audio, you see what's the intensity of the audio. If it's a beat, high intensity, then just display a big visualization. If not, it's a small visualization. That's how they do it. But it's not exposed out to the SDK, it's not at height. So, tough luck. That's why there is no iMovie on Android. Okay. So, what's the way forward? All the video codecs are sitting below a layer, which is again given by Khronos. It's called OpenMax. OpenMax integration layer. So what happens is, if you write a media application which is compatible to the OpenMax standard, which is faithful to the OpenMax standard, and you have a platform which is faithful to the OpenMax standard as well, you have a platform-independent code which can interact with any of the underlying codecs. This OMX codec.h is present in the Git, the source tree. If you see base media frameworks, it's present there. If you expose it out to the LDK, give out some libraries to process media, then we'll be able to create better applications. Otherwise, what you need to do is you need to go into the source level and work there, but you can't sell that app anywhere because the image belongs to you. So the OMX codec is the thing that needs to be exposed, and I think they are thinking about exposing this sometime in the future. Let's see. This would facilitate the processing and editing of videos, where you can have much more control over getting frames of video and stuff like that. So that's about video and Android. Let's go to graphics. OpenGL on Android. OpenGL, you would have seen the gallery, and you twist the phone, you can see that it goes front and behind. Those are all the 3D effects which you accomplish using the OpenGL API. There are two versions of OpenGL on Android. There is a GL10 and the GL20. Unfortunately, GL20 is not backward compatible with GL10. So if you want to write a multimedia application and you want to use graphics API, you have to decide which version you want to use, because later you can't switch back. So you have a GL20 and GL10. GL20 started on from Proto, and GL10 corresponds to OpenGLES 1.0, 1.1 Khronos standard, and 20 corresponds to OpenGLES 2.0 standard. For most of the people familiar with OpenGL, the OpenGL calls are rendered onto the graphics processing unit. It's not the CPU, it's the GPU. So all the graphics calls go onto the GPU. GPU is a SIMD kind of processor. It specializes at writing graphics effects. So normal CPUs take a lot of time to do such things, but GPUs specialize in doing that things. But not all GPUs are built equal, not all GPU drivers are written equal. There are some really bad drivers written which affect the performance. So what happens is, the Nexus 1 phone has an Adreno 200 GPU. There are some Texas Instruments chips for Droid phones which have a PowerVR Imagination Technologies GPU. And there are some other local GPUs made somewhere else. So what happens is, your code, once you write in Android, it's very, very portable. There is no problem porting. I think my friend Bharati told about write once, run anywhere. But this is a case of write once, debug everywhere. So what happens is, your drivers are not faithful, your chips are not equal. So you write a graphics application here, but some phone manufactured in China probably tough luck. So those kinds of issues will be there, but your code is very, very portable. Okay, at the heart of OpenGL is the GL Surface View. This is again a very useful class for an OpenGL developer. This is because they have simplified the OpenGL rendering. They have got everything under the GL Surface View. If anyone would have done the OpenGL programming on other platforms, you have to set up a EGL configuration first and stuff like that. But Android helps you in that. It does everything for you, and all you need to do is write the GL calls. That's all, and it renders everything. What the OpenGL Surface View does is, it spawns a separate rendering thread so that your UI is not burdened by the OpenGL rendering, because OpenGL rendering is very, very heavy task. So what it does is, it spawns a separate thread. It invokes a renderer. The renderer is kind of, I'll discuss about the renderer in the next slide, where your actual OpenGL calls go in. And then once the effects are processed, it displays the frame, the image frame on the screen. So essentially you have a very good image of you, and you want to paste your image on 6 faces of a cube. This is the class to take. And what you do is, you have to take your image, put it as an OpenGL texture, which is basically a RGB version. Nowadays, YUV is also accepted, but RGB is the standard OpenGL processing format. What you do is, you specify your target image as an unsigned short RGB 565. That is 2 bytes per pixel. Each of your images pixel is represented in 2 bytes. It's a 2D texture, and you call this text image 2D, which is present as a member of GL Utils class. And then what you will be able to do is, you will be able to apply cool 3D effects on your picture and animate your picture. That's the use of OpenGL ES. The textures are the only way to use OpenGL. So essentially that. Then there are these compressed textures which are specially used for game developers. For example, in car racing games, you have these borders and stuff like that, which are essentially the same for every screen. You are just replicating based on the angle and stuff. Even the road will be the same. What you do is, you compress them into one format, send it over to the GPU. The GPU uncompresses them and applies effects on them so that you will see the proper game. So those are the compressed textures. Okay. Let's go to the renderer, which actually does the rendering. So what happens is, your GL Surface View class will invoke a renderer, and this on-draw frame will repeatedly be called inside the rendering thread. What happens here is, suppose you want to animate your image. I think people will be familiar with GL scale, translate, rotate. You can add such kinds of calls here, plus some delta, so that you will see some kinds of animation happening. So that is the animator. That's the actual function which keeps getting called. The only obligation of the developer is, we should return immediately from this function. We shouldn't do any heavy tasks inside this function, because the rendering thread shouldn't get blocked there. The performance of the application suffers if we do that. Okay, so just stitching all the three together, that's the textures, the GL Surface View, and the GL Surface View.renderer. Together, what we have is, to begin rendering, we have a new GL Surface View. You are setting your renderer. For example, this is my renderer. You are setting it. Then you are setting the content view of the application to the GL surface view. And then to pause the GL surface view, say you have a call, then you have to pause it. You just call pause. If you want to resume, just resume. And the good application for this is the CubeMap activity in the API demos. This GL is for rendering onto the screen. There are other off-screen rendering techniques like p-buffers and pixel maps, if people familiar with OpenGL. There is an EGL config chooser with which you can choose those kinds of rendering surfaces also. But this one is tailored to rendering onto the screen. Okay. Just some miscellaneous things about OpenGL ES that will really help developers. Debugging OpenGL ES is always a problem. So what Android has done is, this is again a very good thing. You just set debug flags with some mask and you will get all the OpenGL ES debugging calls. There are some games, for instance, you are shooting at something and you are not having any activity. Then you don't need to animate the view. In such cases, what you need to do is, there is set render mode. Render mode when dirty. So the onDraw function doesn't get called repeatedly, so that it doesn't hog the CPU. It remains suspended. Only when there is a request render, it begins rendering. So this is a very useful thing if you are not doing continuous activity on the screen. EGL config chooser, I have already told about this. Okay, the NDK for OpenGL is a very interesting thing. As I have told you, most of the OpenGL rendering happens in RGB color space. Say you have a YUV color frame. YUV is another color format. If you want to convert YUV to RGB on Java side versus if you want to convert YUV to RGB on native side, in my experience, it's a factor of 8 difference. So if it takes 8 seconds on Java, it takes 1 second on native. So that's the difference. So what you have to do is, anyway you have intensive for loops doing kinds of interpolation or resizing, you are addressing images, pixels of an image. For these kinds of things, you have to always go to the native side, speed up the processing and come back to the Java side. Intensive signal processing routines always have to be implemented on the native side. That's the rule. That's almost like always true. So we have to be careful not to implement those kinds of things on the Java side. And that's what I wrote in the last point. Use NDK wherever feasible to speed up the application. So these are some good things about OpenGL. If we incorporate into our applications, we'll be able to build much better applications. Okay, the last part is the bitmaps. I just included because it's multimedia stuff. So some people may want, you take a color photo and you want to make a black and white photo of your such kinds of applications. You want to do some image processing. Then this is the class we need to look at it. Or you have a photo, you want to rotate the photo, stuff like that. You want to write a slideshow. For such kind of applications, probably this might be useful. What you have is you have a file path, you give it to the decode, you get the pixels, and once you get the pixels, the power is in your hands. But again, remember that once you get the pixels, throw all the pixels to the native side and get the processing done on the native side. Don't do it in the Java side. And what you can do is the process pixels you can return as a JIT array or a JSON array back to the Java side, and there you can re-encode the image back into a JPEG image. There is this bitmap compress which allows you to encode raw pixels into a JPEG image or a PNG image, stuff like that. So bitmaps are essentially useful there. There is another class called image view. For instance, if you want to have an image moving on the screen of the phone, you can use this class. Just set the path of the image to the image view, and you can apply animations on the image view. So your image view can go whichever way you want. And the animations can be specified in the XML file. I'll show you how to do that. This is the animations part. It's really small. So the animation part is written here. You are telling Android one shot. It means it's a single animation. You are putting it to true. That means it happens only one time. Then there are 3 images. Rocket thrust 1, 2, and 3 each have to be displayed for 200 milliseconds, and that's how it happens. And here, the name of this XML file is rocket thrust. You are giving that here, and all you are telling is rocket animation start, and you can see that image view is being animated, 3 images being animated. So that's how you can use images and animate images in Android. Okay, so that brings us to the end.
Okay, so let's open the floor for questions. Who wants to go first?
Okay, you mentioned that there will be no iMovie for Android for the moment because of some of the limitations on the framework, right? Yeah, but the thing is that is it actually possible to do live streaming from the phone to another phone, for example?
I don't know if the framework allows that kind of. I don't know if from the source level anything is possible, but from the SDK level I doubt it.
Okay, you got it.
Okay, next one.
Is there any native library that you recommend to use?
GLES, there is a libGLES native library for the OpenGL. Okay.
It's enough for. It's enough.
Okay. If you are writing your OpenGL app entirely on the Java side, you don't need anything. But when you are writing your OpenGL partly in Java and partly in the native, for example, if you are using any signal processing routines, then you need to have libGLES. There is a native library. There is a sample available in the SDK. You can SAN and there is one sample. You can just take a look at it. So they have a native library. You have to include that, and you have to include OpenGL. You can. There's one clarification. When I say iMovie on Android is difficult, if you have your own codex bit, you can always get over to the NDK, compile your codex, and probably write an iMovie kind of application without HD support. But otherwise, I doubt you can write it.
If you take a picture from the say Excel sheet, it's generally around 3 or 4 GB. So if in my bitmap, there is a bitmap and if you want to go to the bitmap, it consumes 4 MB or 5 MB in our phone. So are there any utilities you will not compare that?
Okay, there is a bitmap resize function. So what we do is, after bitmap decode factory, I don't know if I have that. There is a resize function which you can resize to 320 240 QVGA resolution, and then you can process it. You have a bitmap resize.
Mohan, I don't know if you would like to answer this, but a very generic comment, not very specific problem. Generic Android was developed originally for handphones. So to some extent it still believes it lives on a handphone. Nobody uses that for Android on a laptop. We're not lots of tablet, it's like PCs coming out at the moment. We're only looking for something to do one. Specifically, I know a customer at the moment wants to develop an application on Android like PC with an external camera. Android still thinks it's on a handphone and the camera is built in. This means that I can't use an externally attached USB camera and it will go over. Android will not capture images from USB camera. I can use an external web-based camera, but that actually costs 2 or 3 times as much as the PC.
That's actually a source. Probably we should write a driver and push it into the system.
I don't know if there's any sort of future talk that someone could give based on this Android will also live on the handphone.
I think probably it's slightly unfair, but I think it's Microsoft or
Well, what we're going to find is when Google brings out results like this PC that then suddenly things are going to change a bit.
Okay, next question. Yeah, what?
Nano is video on demand is available on Android or not? Which means that Android user want to select the video frame it want, then is it possible like the server can like assign the GQ frames depends on the users renders? Is it possible?
Should be possible. You are actually essentially streaming a video, just like YouTube is streaming a video, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be possible.
But is there any buffer to like, because there's many choices of video the user wants to watch. So
Okay, there are format problems. For example, if you want to watch an exotic format on Android, probably it might not play. You have to stream in a format which the phone understands, preferably MPEG-4 simple profiles, or YouTube has recently migrated to H.264, so probably H.264 is something the phone understands. So in H.264 3GP format, I think it should be a good stream.
okay.
Okay, next question.
Is it possible to modify the outgoing voice call? Like we make an application to change my voice to when I call someone.
I really doubt if it's possible because you can't get audio samples out from the native side. You have to actually start processing the audio.
Or is it, so you mean it's not possible to stream out the processed voice into the telephony line?
No, it's possible. You can do it. As of now, the one feature which is there is actually the medium of voice.
Nothing to the SDK level.
From the SDK.
Do you want to do it in SDK or NDK or do it at all in any way?
Anyway.
Anyway, anything is possible. You have to write code and yeah, really.
Then you